Are you stressed now trying to figure out what pair of underwear to put on? Well, no look no further. I'm about to help you put your underwear on, just like I'm about to help you win your fantasy football league championship with telling you you should start during this week for the wide receivers, tight ends, and that way you can stop worrying about the pair of underwear that your wife that has your dog's face on them, so you don't have to worry about that no more. All right, so the first person on my list is Diontae Johnson, Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver, coming from playing the New York Giants this coming week. The New York Giants are a terrible defense. They gave up 41 points to wide receivers last year. With Diontae Johnson playing this team, he is in his second year. He was a rookie last year, so he was one of those receivers, the rookie wide receivers that had an outstanding year and one of those up and coming ones that the NFL has to offer. He should be licking his chops this week, knowing that they gave up over 2,600 yards to receiving, also giving up the second most touchdowns with 22 on the season. Being that he was the number one receiver on the team for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he took a big advantage of that, having 92 targets, which was most on the team. Like I said, Juju Smith-Schuster did miss some time last year, so he had to kind of lead into that role, which he did an outstanding job. Now, the good thing is that all the eyes and defenses will be on Juju Smith-Schuster in the passing game, so that could actually open up his game a little bit more. And also with Ben Roethlisberger coming back as that kind of solidified starter, Ben Roethlisberger is obviously coming back from that shoulder injury, which was season-ending last year, so he may have a little bit of rust to kind of dust off, but he's professional. He's been there before. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had the most receptions as a rookie, so I expect big things for him this year, and also going against this lousy New York Giants defense. All right, so next person on this, I knew you were going to say Julian Edelman's an obvious start, but not so much anymore. He has a new quarterback, not named Tom Brady. His name is Cam Newton. So, but the New England Patriots are going against the Miami Dolphins, which had also a very terrible defense. And number one in fantasy as far as giving up touchdowns to wide receivers. They gave up 23 touchdowns last year. Julian Edelman had 100 receptions on the season and had a little over 1,100 yards receiving along with 6 touchdowns. Going against this Miami Dolphins defense that gives up a lot of yards, 2,400 to be exact. Like I said, no Tom Brady this coming year, and he was really the only option in the passing game last year, mainly because they didn't have any other wide receivers. Some were hurt, some just weren't playing up to their standard. Now he has a new quarterback named Cam Newton who wants that fresh start to be able to show the world that he was an MVP in 2015, that he still has that arm that will be able to make him a very good quarterback, and also is going to help Julian Edelman tremendously if he can kind of catch that same fire. The Miami Dolphins also gave up a lot of points to wide receivers last year. They were ranked 30th in the NFL as far as how many points they gave up, with almost 41 points per game. So obviously another player that should be licking his chops going against this weak Miami Dolphin defense. All right, so next person on the list is Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin came on the scene last year and did not disappoint. He's going against the New Orleans Saints defense that was one of the weaknesses in their game. They gave up almost 40 points to last year to wide receivers. They also gave up 18 touchdowns, so obviously that's something that's a concern for the New Orleans Saints going against this high-powered offense that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have to offer. In the game last season when they did play the Saints, Chris Godwin went off in one of the games. He had 125 yards with 2 touchdowns last season versus the Saints. So obviously he has the ability to kind of take it to the next level to play. This team does not get intimidated by that moment. Last year he had 86 receptions with almost 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns for him. Another thing to kind of know, obviously, Tom Brady's in town, not along with the Patriots anymore, like I said in the previous section about it. Tom Brady has a lot of things that he can do, being at his age, a lot of things with experience. He also has something to prove that he's just not a one-trick pony. He can be himself, and he has a lot of weapons as well, and Chris Godwin's obviously one of those weapons that he can use. Mike Evans, as of late, has just come on saying that he is injured, so he may not play this coming week. So he is going to be the number one receiver most likely, and probably the first option in the passing game outside of maybe Gronkowski. They probably share that role. But Chris Godwin is someone you want to put in that starting lineup this coming week. All right, so my wild card this week is going to be Alan Lazard from the Green Bay Packers. He came on the scene last year and was able to play a few games last year. Now, this is kind of a tricky one. I wouldn't say necessarily he's your number one receiver to put in there. Obviously, if you have a number one receiver or number two, he'd be more of my flex or super flex option, mainly because he had 9 targets against the Vikings last year. So he's able to get open, and Aaron Rodgers is looking for him. And he is the second on the depth chart for the Green Bay Packers. So he is someone you want to put in that starting lineup that's probably going to have a big game, being that the Minnesota Vikings almost gave up 40 points last year, which was the 28th worst in the NFL. And he did not play in all the games last year, so that's not a big opportunity for him. Now he's going to be able to start and be in all the games. Hopefully health can keep him in those games. And I feel that this is probably a great start for anybody that has Alan Lazard on their team to put in that flex or super flex spot. Again, he's not a number one receiver, number two receiver. He's someone you want to put in that flex spot. Hopefully he can kind of get going against this Minnesota Vikings and kind of lead into other games for himself, but he needs to be in your starting lineup this coming week. All right, my first wide receiver sit that you're going to want to sit out will be Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker is going against, again, the New England Patriots. Like I said, they're probably going to be on this list a lot, just mainly because of who their defensive back is, a.k.a. his name is Stephen Gilmore. He was Defensive Player of the Year last year, so he is someone that you're going to want to pay attention to. The New England Patriots only allowed 4 touchdowns last year to wide receivers, which is an outstanding feat, especially with the passing game and how much the NFL has translated into that passing game. It obviously helps when you have a number one cornerback named Stephen Gilmore on your side. They were the number one ranked defense against wide receivers last year in fantasy football last year. He was on the injury report, but says he is good to go. So obviously that's something people need to pay attention to see if he goes back on there. Now, to kind of note, a side note with the game last year, because obviously with the Miami Dolphins, they played the New England Patriots twice in a year. He did have 0 receptions in the first meeting, which was 7 targets. Now, last game of the year, don't get me wrong, he went off. Don't get me wrong on that. But you kind of think about it this way. The reason he went off, they probably weren't playing. They probably weren't game playing the way they were supposed to, mainly because they're thinking about the playoffs. And with that said, Devontae Parker is going to be travel with Stephen Gilmore on the very first play all the way up until the end. So I would not start Mr. Devontae Parker this week, mainly because of who he's going to be probably playing against on the other side of that ball. All right, Rashad Perriman, he came from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He just newly signed with the New York Jets. They're going against the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills are one of the better defenses in the NFL. He's also another kind of cornerback that they're going against. Trayvon White. Trayvon White just signed a new contract, so obviously he's something to prove to show that why he signed him as a number one receiver. He is going to be the number one receiver. Last year he was not, because they had Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, so he didn't have all that pressure. Now he's being lifted into that role, so we'll kind of see what he does, but I don't feel like this is probably the best defense or the best time for him to get that. It's not a good matchup for him. The Buffalo Bills were the number 9. They're in the top 10 of giving up points to receivers. They're under 30 points to all wide receivers. The last 3 games of the year went off, but not against top defenses. So they were not anything that should be anything special. He only had 645 yards. And that kind of note from those 3 games, out of those 3 games, 349 of those yards were in those last 3 games. So kind of think about if you take that away, he only had a little over 300 yards per game last season in the NFL. So that's not something I would be probably proud of necessarily, and someone I would probably not put in that role as a starting wide receiver this coming week. I probably haven't set out this one. All right, so next person on the list is Marvin Jones Jr. from the Detroit Lions going against the Chicago Bears this week. The Chicago Bears, are one of the better defenses. They gave it the least amount. They were tied for the least amount of points. They gave under 27 points per game. So Marvin Jones Jr. in the 2 games they did play, because it is a rivalry, so obviously they're going to play twice in a year. He only had 40 yards in one game and 77 in another. Last year, only had 100 yards twice last year in all the games that he played during the season. And last year, he also had tied the second lowest in his career in yards per reception. Probably a big contributing factor would have to be him getting a backup quarterback and not having Matthew Stafford in that role for the entire season. That has a big impact on obviously wide receivers, mainly because of who's throwing the ball. All right, so the final piece of this series is the tight end position with the San Francisco 49ers having George Kittle, I'm pretty sure this is probably a no-brainer. You got to make sure you put him in there. The Arizona Cardinals were one of the worst teams against the tight end. They're actually known for giving up big plays to tight ends and making them look like superstars. But George Kittle, without a question, is a superstar. George Kittle is going against an Arizona Cardinals defense that gave up 14.38 points last year to tight ends, which is 28th worst in the NFL. During that span, they gave up almost 1,200 yards to tight ends just to that position alone, which is the highest amount, and also to 14 touchdowns to that position. So that is obviously a cause for concern for many people, mainly because that is a weakness within their defense. George Kittle is obviously probably the second, without a doubt, arguably the best tight end in the NFL last season, having 85 receptions, a little over 1,000 yards. But he does it all, obviously, with the running game also, too. But George Kittle is someone, put him in there this week against the Arizona Cardinals. Another good tight end you want to put in this week, mainly because of who they're playing. The Tyler Higbee from the LA Rams are playing the Dallas Cowboys this week. The Dallas Cowboys did not also have a very good defense when it came to the tight end position, averaging almost 15 points per game just from that position alone. And Tyler Higbee, coming into that game last year when they played the Dallas Cowboys, had his career year, or career game, I would say. He had 14 targets on 12 receptions. He also had 111 yards catching. Granted, I will say he did not have a touchdown, so obviously that's not a good thing, but he had a lot of yards in that game. It was a blowout, so obviously maybe towards the end of the game it really wasn't that big of a deal, but with that said, that obviously shows that they have the confidence in him, because he also put up 116 yards in the week before against the Seattle Seahawks. So he had 4 straight games of 100 yards or more. On the year, he only had 3 touchdowns. But when you have a Robert Woods on the offensive side of the ball and a Cooper Kupp, you're gonna get them the ball, mainly because that's who your focal point is. Especially with Cooper Kupp being that slot receiver, they're gonna pass him the ball a lot. But Tyler Higbee is someone you want to start as your starting tight end this week. All right, so another great guy I would start this week would be Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst was coming from the Baltimore Ravens, just traded in the offseason. The Atlanta Falcons had to make a move, mainly because they lost Austin Hooper in free agency. He went over to the Cleveland Browns. So Hayden Hurst is now your number 1 tight end for the Atlanta Falcons. Kind of just a side note with Austin Hooper, when he had his time here with the Atlanta Falcons, he had great numbers. He had, last year alone, he had 787 yards and 97 targets with 75 receptions. So that is obviously great news for Hayden Hurst as far as fantasy football owners, mainly because they do look at that position as something that's very important. Even with the likes of a Julio Jones, a Calvin Ridley, and now they have Todd Gurley on the team, that obviously opens up his game so they can possibly pass him the ball. And going against the Seattle Seahawks defense that actually was pretty bad against the tight end position, averaging almost a little over 15 points per game last year and almost 1,100 yards in receiving. So obviously that is a hole in their defense, and you want to make sure you have that player in that hole, and which would be Hayden Hurst as your starting tight end this coming week. Pieces of this is with the tight ends that we need to have sit down will be Austin Hooper from the Cleveland Browns, obviously come from the Atlanta Falcons, like we just talked about a little bit ago, going against a stingy defense of the Baltimore Ravens. Only gave up about 7.5 points to tight ends last year. Austin Hooper statistically had one of the better seasons as a tight end, but going to the Cleveland Browns when there is an Odell Beckham, a Jarvis Landry in the passing game, you're probably going to get overlooked a little bit more than you would like to. But also Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb as your backs will also cause your concern as far as a fantasy football owner having Austin Hooper as your starting tight end. Also having Baker Mayfield, which is probably one of the least accurate quarterbacks in the NFL. You want to make sure you have a great, obviously, accurate quarterback, and Baker Mayfield just didn't have it last year. Coming into the season, he was supposed to be, like I've said before, the team was supposed to kind of go all the way to the Super Bowl, have a very statistically great year, but that obviously fell off really quick. Then they brought in Kevin Stefanski from the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings offensive coordinator last year helped Dalvin Cook with a career year last year. And he looks to probably do the same with a combination of Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, which obviously is not a bad idea. But Austin Hooper is probably going to take a backseat in that aspect. Being the 5th option is obviously not going to get the targets that he would like. at all, especially against the Baltimore Ravens this week. It's a bad matchup for Mr. Austin Hooper. All right, kind of finish this out. Logan Thomas, a former quarterback. I can kind of make this short and sweet. Do not start him this week. He only had 16 receptions, 173 yards. So obviously with the Washington football team, they need a tight end, and obviously Mr. Logan Thomas is not. But playing against the Eagles, he's not going to get those looks. Most people obviously probably not going to take this guy, but if you do have him on your team, please do not start him. He is not going to do anything for you. He only had one catch last year, which is only one catch of 15 yards. Just make sure that you do not put Logan Thomas as your starting tight end. All right, guys, week 1 is in the books. Week 2 is coming soon. I hope you enjoy the content. Please like, subscribe to the YouTube. Obviously, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and also, too, I'll catch you on the next one, week 2. I'm so excited the football season's finally back. I hope you are, too. Stay tuned.